check on what local elections officials are seeing and what precautions are in place for Election Day. Then, a beacon of light returns for Amelia Island mariners after 18 months in the dark. And a Unity dinner refreshes the menu with shades of red, white, and blue. Plus, an exhilarating fourth quarter couldn't carry the Jags past the Packers. We talk about all that and take your calls at 904-549-2937. You can also email First Coast Connect to WJCT.org or tag us on social. It's all ahead this hour after the day's news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. Former President Donald Trump campaigned in New York City yesterday, but his guest speakers at the Madison Square Garden rally are facing criticism for inflammatory comments. One comedian called Puerto Rico a, quote, floating island of garbage. The Trump campaign issued a statement saying the comment does not reflect the view of Trump or his campaign. In a new campaign video released prior to Trump's rally, Vice President Harris criticized Trump's handling of two hurricanes that hit the island in 2017. Harris says she will create a new task force to support Puerto Rico's economy.
To foster economic growth and create thousands of new, good-paying jobs in Puerto Rico, including for our young people.
Harris campaigned yesterday in Pennsylvania. The key swing state has more than 500,000 eligible Latino voters. The Latino Policy and Politics Institute at UCLA says the majority of these Pennsylvania Latino voters are of Puerto Rican descent. Harris will campaign in Michigan today. Trump will return to the Atlanta area. From member station WABE, Raul Bali reports it's Trump's third rally in the region over the past 2 weeks.
Trump's recent Georgia rallies have been in the Atlanta area, while earlier ones were concentrated in Republican-heavy rural parts of the state. Campaign surrogates believe there's a percentage of swing voters they can still get in Atlanta's northern suburbs. Speaking in downtown Atlanta Saturday, Vice Presidential nominee J.D. Vance pushed supporters to vote early.
So I'd encourage all of us to get out there, vote early if you're able to, because it's how we're going to, get enough votes in the bank so that we make sure that Donald Trump wins the state of Georgia.
More than a third of Georgia's registered voters have already cast a ballot. Trump is also meeting with hundreds of pastors in suburban Atlanta. For NPR News, I'm Raul Bali in Atlanta.
Students in Asheville, North Carolina public schools are returning to classes today for the first time since Hurricane Helene left widespread damage and flooding across the region. Laura Hackett with Blue Ridge Public Radio reports students in Asheville have been away from school since late September.
Schools in Asheville have had to restore power and internet, reconfigure bus routes around devastated roads, and figure out a workaround to a city water system that still cannot deliver clean drinking water. Now that they're reopening, educators are greeted with a new challenge, making up for 20 days of missed classes. School board member Amy Ray hopes to get some tutors.
I hope at this point that we would be able to find donors to help us pay for just really robust tutoring.
Educators are also preparing for a surge of mental health struggles among students and staff, some who have lost homes and friends due to the storm. For NPR News, I'm Laura Hackett in Asheville, North Carolina.
You're listening to NPR News from Washington.
And this is WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Good morning. I'm Stephen Ponson. It's 9:04. There's a new grocery option for Jacksonville residents. This past weekend, the area's first Gordon Food Service location opened near Beach and University Boulevards. The Michigan-based chain sells wholesale in smaller packages. It requires a free membership to shop there, according to news partner the Jacksonville Daily Record. And the store also has prepared foods like fried chicken and deli sandwiches. The True Leaf Cannabis Company has given another $10 million to Smart and Safe Florida, the political committee leading efforts to pass a proposed constitutional amendment allowing the recreational use of marijuana. Margie Menzel has more.
The latest donation brings the company's total cash and in-kind contributions to $113 million as of October 18th, according to a newly filed finance report in a state elections database. True Leaf has largely bankrolled the Smart and Safe Florida Political Committee, which is fighting to pass what appears as Amendment 3 on the November 5th ballot. Governor Ron DeSantis is helping lead efforts to try to defeat the proposal, and state agencies have run controversial television ads aimed at dissuading voters from supporting the measure. I'm Margie Menzel.
Will be partly sunny this afternoon in Jacksonville. Highs will be in the mid to upper 70s. If you're headed out to the beaches, just know that there is a high rip current risk through Wednesday. Partly cloudy overnight with lows in the mid 60s.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Indeed, designed to be an end-to-end hiring solution for businesses of all sizes to attract, interview, and hire candidates, all from one platform. Learn more at Indeed.com/NPR.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, 1 week into early voting, Duval election supervisor Jerry Holland tells us what patterns he's seeing and how his team is preparing for election night. Later in the program, building community around the dinner table. We talk about the Breaking Bread and Barriers event and what it hopes to achieve. But first, early voting is well underway, both in Florida and Georgia, with record numbers casting ballots in a presidential contest expected to have a close, contentious, and possibly challenged outcome. Here to discuss what he's seeing and how he's planning, we're joined by Duval election supervisor Jerry Holland. Good morning, Jerry.
Hey, good morning, Ann.
Great to have you here. So let's, if we can, sort of start with the tail of the tape. What are we seeing here in terms of early voter turnout?
Well, what we've noticed is obviously this is the first full week of early voting we just completed. We've gotten back about 143,000 ballots in from early voting. The turnout was very good. We're somewhere almost close to 30% of our voters having cast a ballot, with 143,000 early and about 48,000 vote by mail ballots. So where we need to be is where we think the numbers show. What we want to see is about 400,000 voters vote prior to Election Day. That would be a good number. That would take us to about the mid 75% turnout.
And so that would be like another 200,000 or so that would come on Election Day?
We're anticipating just over about 100,000 to come on Election Day. We think we'll be somewhere around 500,000 votes total. That'll take us to about 77% turnout. And so if we can make it to 400,000 before Election Day, we'll be able to handle the crowds on Election Day.
And how does that compare to prior elections if you get that turnout you're expecting?
We'll be higher. The 2020 election was about 73%, so we definitely will be higher as an overall number of percentage. A little bit has also to do, when you're talking percentages, is how clean your rolls are. By that, I mean, if you have a lot of voters on the rolls that are no longer living here or deceased, it's going to change your turnout percentage numbers. So having voters that are here, active, have the eligibility to vote, increases your turnout percentage. Numbers-wise, the number of voters will probably be close to or a little bit greater than 2020.
I want to ask you more about the current turnout, but when you talk about how clean your rolls are, there was an initiative earlier this year where you were trying to contact people who had been deemed inactive. There was a kind of a large number of voters that had been deemed inactive, and that's because of a new state law. Explain to us what happened again, and then kind of where we are with that effort to contact those people.
Well, thank you. As most people know or don't know, is actually we move through the process of a voter. Voters are active voters when you register. You can become an inactive voter not by the amount of times you vote, but relative to the fact that if you move and do not update your address with us, then when we send you election mail, which is non-forwardable, it comes back to us. It starts another process. We send a forwardable piece of mail to you. If you don't respond within 30 days, then we move you from a status of active to inactive. Doesn't mean you can't vote. It just means we don't need to send you any more mail because you're not living at that address. Now, what we did with the help of community partners and and everything is reach out to those inactive voters. Of course, we couldn't reach out them by mailing because we'd already tried that, but reach out to them by seeing if we had any phone numbers, email addresses. And we started out with over 90,000 inactive voters, almost 95,000. After our process, we were able to have contact numbers to probably at least a third of those and reached out to them. And we did get, I would say, somewhere around 4,000 to 6,000 inactive voters update their registration and address. So that definitely helps us to be able to send them sample ballots and make sure they're voting in the correct precinct.
You're talking about becoming inactive when their address is no longer current. But on this program, we've talked about people who are removed or not removed, sorry, who are deemed inactive if they don't participate in 2 successive federal elections.
Now the key with that is you don't become inactive by not participating. But if you're inactive status and you don't participate in 2 federal elections, you move to the 3rd stage, which is ineligible, which just means you have to re-register. You're probably no longer here, but if you move back here, then it's a re-registration process.
Okay, that's a very important clarification. Thank you for that. If you're just joining us, we're talking about election prep and security with Duval Election Supervisor Jerry Holland. You can join our conversation on air by calling 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org or reach out on social media. So I want to talk to you a little bit about safety and security. That has been a big topic nationally. Some places have had some very strict protocols put into place that themselves are a little bit scary to hear about, drones and SWAT and sniper. And, and those are in some particularly contentious places, like in Lucerne County, Pennsylvania, or Maricopa County, Arizona. You have dealt with contentious elections in the past, but what are you hearing? What are you preparing for? Who are you in contact with ahead of Election Day?
Well, without a doubt, it is a concern across the elections community. We work hand in hand with the FBI. They've come and toured our facilities, Homeland Security, CISA, the Cyber Infrastructure Security Agency. So you're looking at threats or security issues on several levels. Threats when it comes to cyber attacks, threats when it comes to physical altercations, also coming to the protection of your equipment, your building, those kind of things. So it's several levels that you're concerned about. We were, obviously concerned at the beginning of last month with some concerns that maybe of receiving mail that could have dangerous materials within them. So we had to put protocols in to open mail in an enclosed room, it's almost like where you put your hands through a box that has gloves and you open the envelope inside that to make sure there's no substance. All those things to make sure, putting the room in a secured room because what happens if we get a piece of mail that has a dangerous substance in it, it could shut down that entire building that we're in. So isolating where we open the mail so that it doesn't stop the entire election process in that particular building. Those are some of the things we had to look at. The other side is really, as many people concerned, and poll workers are, the physical threats. Now, what we've heard mostly from our partners in the security side is we do not believe that during the election process we'll see that as much as maybe after the election process. The reason for that is both sides of, on candidates and everything, both believe their candidates are going to win. Therefore, there's nothing to fight over at this point necessarily. But on the other side, too, what we've seen is voters, some of them, they're more sensitive, to the surroundings. They're more sensitive to, are they being watched? Are they being, given a fair opportunity to vote? So they're kind of hypersensitive. And I have to inform my poll workers is, listen, you're not there to confront. If you give them instructions, but they seem like they don't want to follow, like maybe they're talking in the room and you just instruct them, please be quiet, but don't take it further. Don't confront, don't escalate the situation, de-escalate it by just letting every voter, when they finish, will leave. So don't push their buttons, because some of them are very sensitive and feel like, election workers are not on a fairness issue. And so it's something we have to be aware of.
We've got a call from Don in Atlantic Beach. Good morning, Don. Go ahead.
Good morning. I just wanted to call and compliment Jerry Holland on his managing the system. I worked in 5 elections, and we had heard many times, people that I don't vote, it's not honest, blah, blah, blah. So I wanted to know what was going on. So I was fortunate enough to be in 3 different positions during those 5 election cycles. And I got to tell you, it's the most secure system. The people that are involved in the system are honest and upfront. And anytime you want to work in a specific position, there's a 4-hour or more training course for that position. Kudos to Jerry Holland.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks for that call, Don. I was mentioning to you before the show, we had a visitor from State Voices Florida this last week. They're going around and just meeting with media organizations to try to answer questions and offer some resources, during this season. And their representative had just really high praise for you, said that you're the most responsive election official in the state, which I think says something.
Well, I tell you, I think something that builds confidence in the election process, that transparency is responding to people when they have questions, when they send you. I give out my cell phone numbers. It's on the website. People will call me or text me. They have my email address. When they have concerns, responding as quickly as possible. Because one thing we've learned on social media, if there's something negative out there on elections, or this is happening and it's wrong, it will spread like wildfire. So we have to put that fire out, give the truth, give the facts, and communicate with people. If we're not communicating, it gives the impression we're hiding something. And I think that lacks, integrity and fails when it comes to confidence in the elections.
Got a call from Tim. Good morning, Tim. Go ahead.
Good morning. Yes, sir. Last time you were on the show, I asked you if you felt that the 2020 election was fair. And then you kind of said, well, it's questionable. Don't want to put words in your mouth, sir, but I'm just saying, if you feel that it was a questionable election, could you actually pinpoint exactly why you think and where you think it was a questionable? And if you think that's true, then what would make us think that your system is not questionable? Thank you so much, sir. I actually think you're doing a great job.
Well, thank you, sir. What I spoke about then is, I get asked the question, I've been asked, do you think the 2020 elections were fair? Do you think it was stolen? Any of those terminologies. My statement, as always, and it's been consistent, is I have no facts whatsoever, personally, that the election was stolen or there's something of that nature. But what I do say is this. What I saw as a bystander is the lack of transparency. I saw election officials not willing to answer questions. I saw in Pennsylvania where they'd covered some windows, and they said they did that while the voting tabulating process because they wanted the security of the workers. What I saw was the lack of transparency. How I overcome that is be transparent, and that's evident by the people who see how we run, how they have questions, and we answer that. So I've never responded as it comes to the equipment. I know our equipment, the way it's tested, the logic and accuracy test, the security, the chain of custody, how we record the vote, how we report the vote. I have total confidence in our voting system.
What lessons do you think your brethren around the country have learned since 2020? And what are they doing differently that could help?
Well, what I hope they've learned is to be transparent. And I know that sounds redundant, but it's really about communicating to the public and answering their questions, because so much of it, there's the urban legends of elections, we call it. It's the things, it's, like even they don't count the vote by mail ballots unless it's close. No, actually, in the state of Florida, we count those first, and they actually have to be reported by 7/15. One thing, as far as I would like to see throughout the states, is we're not consistent how we do elections. Florida, I think, does a very good job. We can always criticize some aspects, but what they do good is we want to get the results to the voters as quickly as possible. We think that if if you continue the process of tabulating and counting, then there's a feeling that you're changing the score as the game goes along. What Florida does is we're allowed to tabulate after the logic and accuracy test all the early votes and vote by mail ballots. So therefore, we can report them by 7:15 election night. Some states don't start counting vote by mail ballots until after election night.
What would you like people to know about how results come in? I mean, we hear sometimes, like a blue wave or a red mirage, or that there's kind of a pattern that develops, and then that narrative can really dramatically change over the course of an evening or
Yeah,
days.
yes, and it surprises voters because many voters just think that everyone or both parties are voting at the same time equally, and it's not true. We used to see before 2020, Republicans took advantage of vote by mail, and they were a larger percentage of people requesting. After 2020, Democrats vote more by mail than Republicans. So if you're looking to say, okay, more Democrats' votes have come in, we see right now locally in the early voting, typically Democrats led in early voting. Right now, Republicans are leading in the turnout of early voting. What's nice is in the state of Florida, you can go on every supervisor of elections website and you can see the turnout, not the vote count. I mean, not the votes is how they voted, but who's voting. So you get that feeling of who's come out so far. So you don't get this surprise. Typically, Republicans show up more on election day than Democrats do. It's a voting pattern. It's consistent most of the time. But in this election, what we saw was with one of the candidates, former President Trump, saying to his supporters, vote early, and he voted early, that we saw more Republicans come out, especially on the first day of early voting. So again, it can be driven by the candidates, but it's interesting to watch those turnout numbers.
And you're offering an option for voters between electronic voting and paper ballots.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because when you come into early voting, everything in Florida is on a paper ballot. Often we'll hear they're voting on a machine. No, they're not tabulating on that machine. That machine is filling out a ballot for you. And there's pluses to that. The pluses is this. One is, and I've seen so many ballots that have come back in, especially vote by mail, where voters who have tremors or bad eyesight, they can't see the oval, and they'll actually mark right next to the oval. Well, if you do that on a paper ballot, and put it in the machine, it doesn't count it. Your intent was to mark that candidate, but your eyesight and your tremors, you marked outside the oval. Where when you use the express vote, what it allows you to do, you can make the screen larger for those with visual impairments. You can also, if you have hearing impairment, listen to the ballot. You can also look at your choices when you mark them. And then if for any reason you want to change it, you can change it. You make a mistake on a paper ballot, you've got to go back, get in line, get another ballot. This allows you to make a mistake. After you make it, you can make the other selection. You also get a review page before you print it out. And then when you print it out, you look one more time at the paper ballot. And if it's got all your choices correct, you put it in the tabulator just like the other paper ballots.
There were some issues that emerged with the electronic machines, though, and you've responded by kind of bringing styluses in so people don't have to use their fingers anymore. You brought one with you. You're holding it up. I see.
Yes, this simple little stylus, which actually we found them on Amazon, and was easy to attach to the express vote. What it did was, we found out when you're using your fingers, and this equipment is actually, this is not the first election. We've used them for at least 4 years here in Duval County. But what we found is some people who had long fingernails, when they went to push their candidate, it pushed the one above. Or if sometimes older people have very cold hands, it reacts different to sensitivity. Some people with very large fingers, actually, if they weren't really in the middle of it, they sometimes touched another one, or their wrist or their knuckles would touch the screen. By adding the stylus, you're pinpoint exactly where you want. And we found the problem of, I was pushing for this when the other candidate lit up. And again, it's not tabulating those. It's lighting up, and it lights up green when that's the candidate the machine thinks you've selected. And if it's not, you just tap on the one with now the stylus to make sure it's the one you want.
Gotcha. We have a call from Rick in Arlington. Good morning, Rick. Go ahead.
Yes, good morning. He may have just answered my question, but I noticed, overheard, when people get ready to select one of the candidates for presidential, it highlights the other candidate that you don't want to vote for, but you don't know until after the fact that you put out. So I want to know, is that the same thing as he just said, or how can that be fixed? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the call. Again, you do know before printing out, because on the express vote, as you go through, before it prints out, it says, here's all your selections. And if you want to change any of them at that point, you can change them. And then it prints out, and then you can look at it one more time before you put it in the machine. But we really think the stylus is going to be the solution to that. Why we never had the problem before, don't know. But definitely we're reacting to the issue and making sure that voters have an easy election process.
Jane on Facebook wrote, I think the DuvalElections.gov's site shares the most transparent data regarding day-to-day activities. Thanks, Mr. Holland. My question, would you advocate for a state/national holiday on every election day? If yes, do you think that would improve turnout? And if not, why not?
Well, it wouldn't hurt. I mean, I think it does help, but because now we have so much opportunities to vote, with the 14 days of early voting, the number of hours that we have, and Monday through Friday it's 7 through 7, and weekends 8 to 5. I think we have great opportunities. As an election official, yeah, I would love if they closed schools, because then we could use schools for voting sites on election day. And actually, they do that in, I believe, Broward County. So, again, we'd love to see more opportunities. Election officials will never say no to that, because our goal would be a perfect world if I saw a 98, 99, 100% turnout. I mean, that would be exciting. So if someone told me it would make it better, I would be, let's try it.
Yeah, we've got a call from Karen in Orange Park. Good morning, Karen. Go ahead.
Good morning. I live and vote in Baker County, and I saw on our ballot that Donald Trump was at the head of the list of presidential candidates, and he's not the incumbent. He's not alphabetically first. I wanted to find out how or who decides the order of those candidates.
Great question.
Hey, that is a great question. It comes up at least once or twice in every election. Here's the news of that. Is back in the 90s, the legislature passed that whichever governor wins the gubernatorial election, then that party of that governor, that party will go first. And you may say, well, those darn Republicans. Well, actually, at that time, the Democrats were in charge of the House and the governor's seat. So it's kind of like back then they probably thought, the party in charge thought, boy, this would be nice, let's do this. And now it's switched to the other side of the aisle. But it is based on who wins the governor's race. If we get a Democratic governor, you will see the Democratic candidate first in those statewide positions and those national positions.
Question from Tom at NAS Jax. Good morning, Tom. Go ahead.
Yes, good morning. Mr. Holland, I've asked you this question before, and I'm sorry to say I did not ask it correctly. Florida no longer participates in reciprocity between other states to know who's registered to vote and if they voted. I understand there was a national database, but Florida withdrew from it because the governor didn't like that there was a Democrat who was running it. So seeing how we don't have access to that national database, how would you know if an individual voter voted here in Florida as well as someplace else, because you haven't got access to the information?
Good question, Tom.
Well, Tom, thank you. In fact, I was one of those. I supported Eric when I was supervisor of elections before.
And that is the national database that we don't participate in anymore.
It's the Elections Recorders Information Center. And so basically, it was, I thought, a good thing, because it allowed us to share our voter registration database with other states. There was some political issues. There was some things where there were some strings where they wanted some certain voter registration activities. I don't know. It really, I pushed for it when I was supervisor before, between 05 and 15. The state got into it after 15, and then they got out of it before I came back in 2023. They talked about, and there was a prototype with Nexus to do other database exchanges. And so there were some prototypes, and we tried to be one of those testing counties, but they had a few counties to do that. So I know they're still looking at other ways we can exchange information and do that. A lot of that searching of eligibility or duplicate voters and others is on the responsibility of the Division of Elections. We don't, as far as local supervisors, do that, but the state does have to do that responsibility. But again, I thought it was a good thing, but I don't know all the details of why the state thought they wanted to be out of it.
And so, in terms of determining whether somebody has voted in another state, that is a more difficult task.
It is more difficult than with the ERIC system because, again, sometimes it takes someone reporting it to us, but it is definitely more. And, Florida being one of those states where we get snowbirds, not so much here in the northern part of Florida, but definitely in the southern part of the state, we see a lot of snowbirds. And so that's always a concern that you've got someone that could be potentially voting in two different states. And so it is illegal, and if they find them, they prosecute, as we know. But again, I've got to think it's harder to find them than it was before.
I'll try to get one or two more quick questions. Steve, just briefly go ahead.
Hi, Jerry. I think you do a great job. I was wondering about your answer on the transparency issue. You mentioned Pennsylvania, where they put something covering the windows. I didn't quite understand why they did that from you. And what were other areas of lack of transparency that concerned you about the 2020 election?
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Steve. What I was told or what I saw was when we've also got at our election centers, everything has got windows. Some things you may not have access into because of security, but we don't want to do anything behind a closed door that you can't watch. And so when covering windows, when I say lack of transparency, it gives you the suspicion you're doing something that someone shouldn't see. And so that's why I say it's better to have that transparency and they shouldn't cover windows. The other aspect, and we all heard that people said, oh, I saw them with boxes of ballots, or I saw them with this, or I saw different things. Well, election officials need to come out and explain what people are seeing. That's the transparency that I thought was lacking. I thought a lot of people asked questions, but I didn't see answers. And so that's where I thought it could be improved on.
We probably need to wrap up, but I just want to ask you, what are your employees experiencing, and what is your advice to the public, if anything, in terms of interacting with and treating your employees?
Well, have patience, because I will tell you, the people who run elections have a passion for them. They're dedicated to the process. They want to help you. They get stressed out. There's a lot of hours they have to work. I just had an employee in her 30s today. She went to the hospital and rescue. She's a critical part of our staff, but stress really gets to them because there is so much stress. And, our office, you can't get it 90% right or 95. It's 100% accuracy or you failed. So there's a lot of stress, a lot of hours that are put into it. So again, be patient on both sides, voters and election workers. Same thing. We've got to be patient. We've got to give ourselves that opportunity for everyone to vote.
Well, we hope your employee recovers fine and that, everything goes safely. So we appreciate you being on today, Jerry Holland.
Thank you, Ann.
Thanks so much. Up next, a beacon of light returns for Amelia Island mariners after 18 months in the dark. Welcome back. Florida's oldest functioning lighthouse is literally beaming after undergoing a year-and-a-half makeover. Here to tell us about the return of the beacon is Tom Sintes, Amelia Island Lighthouse guide and descendant of its original keepers. Hey, Tom.
Yes.
Good
Morning,
morning.
Ann.
So
Thank you.
this is the oldest lighthouse in Florida?
Right. It's oldest, yeah, s- continuing to stand in Florida. There were there were other lighthouses that were built before it, but due to erosion or other structural problems, had to be rebuilt.
And this one actually has an interesting history because it was originally built in Cumberland Island,
Yes.
and had to be like deconstructed and then rebuilt in a different state. It's sort of an interesting path for any
Yes.
lighthouse.
At the time it was built in on Cumberland was 1920, so Florida was a Spanish territory at that time. So they wanted to build it as far south as they could, but Georgia was the furthest southern state,
Oh.
and so it was built in 1820 then, and then as Florida became a state, Florida became a U.S. territory, then the mariners petitioned to say the channel's changing, it's moving south, and it would really better serve the mariners if it was on Amelia Island. So yes, um, the same builder, Winslow Lewis, that built it, deconstructed it and rebuilt it. I don't know how you transport pieces of a lighthouse across the river and and rebuild, but that's what he did.
But that's what they did. And so it is recently restored. It has been dark for the last year and a half, but it's backlit.
Well, yeah, no, it wasn't. What was restored was the the motor and the motor functioning.
Okay.
So the motor was replaced. So the Coast Guard takes care of the motor and the lens part, that the light, the most valuable parts,
Hmm.
and the city and the Coast Guard Auxiliary partner to take care of the grounds and helping with the cleaning. Anyway, the motor was replaced, and but it still didn't work. And then there was another. I think it was computer glitch or a part that they had to wait on, and then with government funding, it was delays, and so yeah, we're delighted to have our light working again. There is some restoration that will be coming up to restore more of the interior and exterior.
Yeah. And you have a long history with this lighthouse. You actually brought us some photographs of your family outside the lighthouse, and we're taking a look at them now. What are we looking at here? What is that picture? Is it?
So that's my grandfather. My grandfather was Thomas John O'Hagan. He was lighthouse keeper from 1925 to 1954 when he retired, and he is holding my mom. My mom is Helen O'Hagan Sintes, and Helen also was she was born and raised there. She called the lighthouse her home for the first 20 years of her life.
Wow. And you're holding
then
up an article from the Times Union that was a profile of your mom.
it was, and she joined when my dad retired. They moved back to the island, and she joined the Coast Guard Auxiliary herself so that she could take an active part in taking care of her lighthouse.
It seems like an extraordinary place to grow up and a very interesting family history that your family dates so far back with this. How does that feel for you to be a part of that long tradition?
Well, it it feels like I'm in the right place where I belong. And I'm privileged to tell those stories. But but my history goes further than that. So my great grandfather was also a lighthouse keeper there from 1905 to 1925. So he was a keeper at Ponce Inlet, and he wanted his kids to have a Catholic education, and he had heard about St. Joseph's Academy on Amelia, and he had requested a transfer, and he got it. So he loaded up 11 kids and the cow,
Wow.
and they moved to Amelia Island.
Wow.
So
That's a heck of a road trip.
it was, and that's Thomas Patrick O'Hagan.
This picture,
Okay,
yeah.
Thomas Patrick O'Hagan, in his lighthouse service uniform, and that's the home, that lighthouse keeper's home, that both my mom and my grandfather lived
So
in.
is this
at that
lighthouse
time.
open to the public? Are people able to go inside of it?
I'm glad you asked. No, so our lighthouse is in a residential area, and so the grounds are not open all the time. Um, so the grounds are open on Saturdays from 11 to 2 for people to go up and take pictures and relax up there. And then we also have lighthouse tours. The first and third Wednesdays of every month at 10 a.m. We are not allowed to climb the lighthouse for liability purposes. The city's not comfortable with that. Um, but I'm, as with my history, family history, I help tell the story of the lighthouse and the history, and then we tour the grounds, and we do open up the lighthouse so that people can go in the base of it and see our beautiful granite steps to the top and smell the kerosene that still permeates the oil house
Wow.
there.
Well, it's an extraordinary history, and it's so interesting that you are able to share that with people. Tom Sintes, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Ann. Appreciate it.
Coming up next, the nonprofit behind and civil conversation is the focus of a dinner series hosted by OneJax. It's a continuation of their community suppers program, but this one is colored by shades of red, white, and blue. And here to tell us about it is OneJax CEO Elizabeth Andersen. Good morning, Elizabeth.
Good morning, Ann. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for being here. And Dr. Nevena Trajkov, Assistant Professor of Political Science and Public Policy at Jacksonville University. Good morning.
Good morning to you all.
Thanks for being here. So, Elizabeth, you're calling this a new and improved community supper series. It's not something, I mean, OneJax has done community suppers before, but tell us about the theme of this one.
Sure. So this year we are mashing up civil discourse and community suppers. We wanted to lean into the election season, knowing that this is a top of mind for folks, and really doing a 4-part series themed One Nation, OneJax, where we're going to be breaking down the Pledge of Allegiance over 4 different community supper sessions. We'll have panel discussion, civil discourse, really modeling for folks how to engage in hard conversation. We'll have some ground rules, and then we'll let our participants spend some time in small group discussion together talking about the issues. So tonight we'll launch our first one, One Nation Under God, which is, of course, an important part of the Pledge of Allegiance. And then we'll have Indivisible, Liberty and Justice, and For All as we move through the year.
I thought that was a really interesting split. You know, you've got the 4 with liberty and justice, and then the last segment is For All. It's kind of an interesting way to divvy up those conversations. So whose idea was it to create this series around this topic?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's been a lot of feedback from our advisors and our board about how to really engage the community. And so it was me talking to a lot of people and thinking about how can we best bring civil discourse back to the community and just be with each other, break bread and break down barriers and learn how to be in space civilly and respectfully with each other again, even if the conversation is hard.
I mean, is framing it around a topic that is sort of political and patriotic, is that a way into more difficult conversations these days?
I think so. I mean, I think that we know that there's a lot of division, a lot of polarization, and this is something that we recognize is harmful to our community and to democracy. And so how do we just lean into topics that are top of mind for folks and practice these skills of empathy and listening and reserving judgment? We can use these skills across any subject area, but right now this is a hot topic.
So, Dr. Trajkov, you're one of the panelists on this first segment discussion. What is useful about breaking down that first line of the Pledge of Allegiance, One Nation Under God? Well, no, it's not the first line. I guess it's the last line, but the beginning of it.
The first session, yes. The use of it is first of all to understand its origins and to understand where it comes from and the motivations behind including it, which has framed our national narrative of lately with regard to the inclusion of Christianity as part of the American identity.
What is the story of including under God in the pledge?
Well, it actually starts in the 1930s, and this is something that I'm sure we'll talk about tonight, but it started in the 1930s as a response to FDR's New Deal and how FDR's New Deal sought to expand social programs for people and holding businesses accountable, right? FDR had a massive push during his presidency to bring more rights to workers and that really upset a lot of the businesses. And from that, you go through a couple of decades and during the Eisenhower presidency, where President Eisenhower really did seek to bring morality, quote unquote, back to the United States through national prayer dinners and all of that stuff. That's when all of that started. And the Knights of Columbus, to aid in this effort, brought in the line "under God" in the Pledge of Allegiance. And this was also during, peak McCarthyism in the Cold War.
And this was about 50 years after the pledge was created, right? I mean, it had
Correct.
been around a good long time.
Correct. And during the Cold War, we had to distinguish ourselves from the atheist, right? So religion became ingrained into the American identity. So this Christian narrative to the American identity, even though, yes, we have our Protestant foundings from the 1700s, but it really became enshrined, documented, put into the text of our American identity starting in the 1950s. And from there, that then caught fire, and we are now living in this conversation that we have always been this Christian American nation, whereas it hasn't even shown up in the documents until the 1950s. And so that has made an impact on society and how we look at what it means to be an American these days.
And a lot of discussion these days around the rise of Christian nationalism. Is that something that you're going to be discussing at this dinner?
Yes, and we'll be also making the distinction between nationalism and patriotism, because those are two in political science, and when we study societies, those are two distinct topics.
Give us a little nickel definition for the people listening.
Well, when you have an ism, that implies that it is something where the focus is at, right? And it's somehow better than the alternatives. So nationalism implies that our nation, which is difficult to define in the United States, in political science, we always have this question of, is the United States, are Americans a nation? And we want to then identify that, and nationalism indicates that your nation is better than other nations. But that's a problematic topic in the United States, because what is the American nation? Whereas patriotism implies that our country, our system of government is better than the alternative. So those are two different things.
That's super interesting. So this event, Elizabeth, is breaking bread and barriers. Just give us a little sense of how this runs. I mean, first of all, it's like a community dinner. What kind of bread? How's everybody situated? And what's the night look like?
Sure. So we'll be right here at WJCT in the soundstage. We're going to have folks coming to join us for a plated dinner. We'll have a sit-down dinner. Our panel will discuss the topic. We're really excited to bring John Delaney back to the OneJax stage, who will moderate this panel discussion. Dr. Trajkov will join us, along with Rabbi Lubliner, Reverend Dean Kate Moorhead, as well as Khan Ibrahim. And so we've got a Christian, a Muslim, and a Jew to help join in the conversation to really round out religion and nationalism. We'll listen, we'll eat together, then we will set some ground rules using gracious space from the city's Human Rights Commission. And then we'll allow about 30, 40 minutes for our tables to engage in the topic before we wrap up for the evening.
Well, it's a great event. It's from 6 to 8 tonight at WJCT Studios. Elizabeth Andersen, Dr. Nevena Trajkov, thank you so much for being here today.
Elder Source's T-Care program can help caregivers avoid burnout. Caregivers that assist Northeast Florida residents aged 60 or older may be eligible to get resources for themselves at no cost. More information at myeldersource.org. Terrell Hogan Law.
I'm Wayne Hogan. Accidents can happen when you least expect it. For decades, our attorneys have dug out the facts to help juries decide who's at fault.
More at terrellhoganlaw.com.
Climate change is a big issue. How can I make a difference? Join ADAPT October 29th for a discussion with local leaders on the latest city and regional resilience efforts, including how you can participate. ADAPT, part of Jacksonville Today, is partnering with Jacksonville's Environmental Protection Board to present Regional Resilience in Action. Register at wjct.org/events.
Campaigns are expected to spend a record $10.2 billion in political advertising this year, and most of that money goes to ads in just 7 swing states.
Even by Pennsylvania standards, 2024 is off the charts. They are everywhere. I mean, you cannot find creases of life where they don't seep into.
That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11, here on WJCT News 89.9.
Millions have already cast their ballot. Millions, too, can't wait for this election to be over. But when will it be over? We look at the precautions in place and how the country might respond in the event one of the candidates claims victory early. What should we all know about the key milestones after Election Day? That's next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Well, it was another rough day for the Jaguars on their home turf. They fell to the Packers 30-27. And News4Jax sportscaster Alessandra Pombrian is here to tell us what went so wrong.
Yeah, so many things went wrong. But I think the biggest news from this game was that Christian Kirk, the wide receiver, broke his collarbone, so he'll be out for the remainder of the season.
Yeah.
I was on the field. I shoot the games for News4Jax, and I was right by, just on the sideline, diagonal from him when he heard it, and you could just tell something bad happened. It just looked like he was in agonizing pain. So I really hope he's okay. Horrible. That actually happened to my twin brother when he was in high school, and it took months for him to recover. So I really hope Christian Kirk is okay, because it's just horrible to see someone suffer such a major injury like that. And he was up for trade talks. The trade deadline is on November 5th, but that's kind of out the door now, obviously. So he'll stay a Jaguar, which is good for Jaguars fans, but, horrible for him what he went through. But yeah, a lot of things went wrong yesterday. 2 turnovers, which don't help, obviously. But they did fight back. They tied it. And then, of course, the Packers, who are the better team, was able to march down and win it by the former Jaguars kicker, Brandon McManus.
Ouch.
I know.
That's a little salt in the wound.
I feel like that's happened so many times this season. It's a former Jaguars player scoring against the Jaguars, and it's always like a big touchdown or a big play, and you're like, oh my goodness, like that just has to suck.
Yeah, that's a drag. And so there were inspirational moments there, but the injuries, went far beyond just the broken collarbone. It's a lot of injuries throughout.
Yeah, over half a dozen. So you had right guard Brandon Sheriff, receiver Gabe Davis, Ronald Darby. They were all starters, suffered injuries in the opening half. And then guard Ezra Cleveland injured his ankle in the third quarter. Brian Thomas Jr. suffered a chest injury after his touchdown catch. Then you had Kirk and safety Andre Sisco left on the final drive. And Brandon Sheriff was the only player that was able to return. And I talked about Gabe Davis, Brian Thomas Jr., Christian Kirk. Those are all your starting receivers. So now that's why you saw Parker Washington and Tim Jones in late in the game. That's why you saw Evan Ingram and Brenton Strange on the field, as well as Tank Bigsby. And also Travis Etienne didn't play yesterday because he's still hurt. So you missed a lot of your starters. So that also, the younger guys had to step up late in the game, and I think that's a positive. Evan Ingram talked about that too. That's good that the younger guys, the guys that don't get as many reps in games, did step up when they needed to be able to at least tie it late, but ultimately the Packers won. So.
What's your take on how Trevor Lawrence did?
I think he did okay. The throwing the interception to Xavier McKinney, I'm not really sure what he saw there because he threw it right to him. The fumble late, I think, was on the 14-yard line is when he fumbled. No, that was his second because that was the third quarter. Or was that the first? Now I'm blanking.
It was a long night.
It was a long day. Yeah. Well, Lawrence is the 3rd and 7 from the Jacksonville 14. That was the worst turnover. Because he ran to the side and they just knocked it out, and you saw the ball just rolling, and you're like, oh no. You know how that's going to turn out. Then that led to a touchdown. So yeah, that was hard. I think he did okay. There was a really nice touch or pass to Christian Kirk that was just a dart to him that was really good. There was another pass to Brian Thomas Jr. that got them in the red zone, and then the touchdown pass to Evan Ingram late in the game that tied it. I thought that was a really good pass. And Evan, for him to catch it too was really good.
There's such a thing as like a really bad win, a bad loss, and a really a better loss. And it seemed like in the world of recent Jaguars losses, this wasn't the worst of the worst.
No, I think the worst loss they'll ever have this season, they have to play the Lions, but probably will be the Bills. They just got absolutely smoked by them. So it's like, nothing could be worse than that, right? Or hopefully. But I did ask Josh Hines Allen after, was it Josh Hines Allen? Yeah, I think I asked Josh Hines Allen after the game, did this loss hurt a little more just because you were tied late in the game, they iced the clock, and then they kicked the field goal to win it? And then also because they've always said you got to win out, we have to win the rest of the games to turn this around. He said, every loss hurts, but Yeah, this one definitely stings just because they were right there. And they could have gone into overtime, and maybe they would have won it into overtime, but the Packers did a good job.
Yeah, the Pack came back. So their next game in Philadelphia against
Yeah.
the Eagles, and there's a history between this coach and that team.
Yeah, that's right. Doug Peterson used to be the head coach of the Eagles. He won a Super Bowl with them, so now he's returning there. Um, yeah, that's going to be a tough one too. It was supposed to be Sunday Night Football, but they flexed them out to an earlier kick.
So is that just some shade? What does that mean that they took them off like kind of high profile game?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a little burn, wouldn't that, but I guess
But is that
NBC
happening
just
'cause of
wanted a
performance?
different.
Is that like
It could partly, or I don't know what the other.
I
I
think they were
forget
going to do
who
the
was.
Colts versus the Vikings instead.
Oh, okay. So you're looking at, well, the Vikings are doing well this season. So maybe they just think that's going to be a better matchup than the Jaguars and the Eagles. I think also partly because of, how the Jaguars are playing. That probably did part of it, but it's okay. They still have it's a 4 p.m. kickoff. So still not bad.
So 2-6.
2-6.
Yeah. Well,
They were 2-6 though 2 years ago, 2022, and they were able to turn it around. So I don't think all hope is lost. We're halfway through the season. So
all right. Well, we'll circle back with you next week, Alessandra. Thanks so much for being here
Yeah,
this
thanks,
morning.
guys.
Alessandra Pombrian from News4Jax. And that's our show. Thank you so much for listening. We encourage your feedback and suggestions. You can send either to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. Join us tomorrow when we look at how racial disparities continue to plague infant mortality rates in Northeast Florida. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjax.com.